Imagine being locked inside a space capsule for 3 months in cramped conditions with only 5 fellow travelers to interact with. Well, that is exactly the assignment which volunteers from Russia, Germany and France signed up for. And today their journey finally came to an end as the capsule was unsealed in Moscow. There's just one problem. They didn't actually go anywhere. Instead, they were simulating what it might be like to go to Mars. From Moscow, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports on the pioneers who stayed in park.
After 105 days, the seal is broken and the lock undone. Moments later, the 4 Russians, 1 German and a Frenchman step out of the capsule into the light of dozens of flashing cameras, apparently none the worse for wear. Their capsule had in fact never left the ground, but everything inside was designed to make them feel as isolated as if they were on a real trip to Mars. The capsule is Spartan and cramped, to say the least. There are no windows, and the radio communication with ground control was deliberately delayed by up to 20 minutes. Speaking to the media afterwards, the Russian commander of the mission declared it a complete success.
This experiment was really a cooperation between many scientists, and it was also a cooperation within the crew. Mutual assistance and support were evident at all times.
But even 105 days is not nearly enough to get to Mars and back. So next year, another group of volunteers will enter this same cramped capsule and be sealed inside for a daunting 520 days. That's nearly a year and a half. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Moscow.
I ask you, what's the difference between that and the Big Brother house? Anyway, now for a journey into space that did actually get off the ground, made it all the way to the moon, in fact, and then made history. 40 years ago this week, Apollo 11 blasted off on the mission that climaxed with man's first step and giant leap onto the moon. Buzz Aldrin was the second to take those strides, and this week I spoke to him about the landmark accomplishment. Mr. Aldrin, great to have you on the program. Let's clear up something first and foremost. There's a rumor out there that you were supposed to be the first man on the moon and not Neil Armstrong. Is that true?
That's kind of like 40 years ago, plus a long time. I hate to delve into rumors right now. It's kind of complicated, but there were reasons why different agendas left us with training about 6 weeks before the flight, and no one had decided yet. It wasn't up to us yet. No one had decided, so somebody, so our training was hampered a little bit by not knowing who was doing what.
You're saying that you might have been slated to be the first man on the moon?
That's what I've heard. But clearly the decision was made 6 weeks before, and I'm a military guy, and when somebody makes a decision, I accept the decision.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Just cast your mind back to 40 years ago. What was the thing that surprised you most, and what is the thing you remember most about that day when you stepped on the moon?
Well, I think the surprise, if there really was one, was the starkness of the visual that we saw out the window and then on the surface after landing.
Beautiful, just beautiful.
The most memorable moment was the few seconds after touchdown, since that really enabled all sorts of things to be done in the future.
Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
So the touchdown is the one thing that had not been done. That had to be demonstrated, and I think we had a great team together that worked with an early spacecraft. It was a little heavier. We landed a little bit long. We had to avoid some craters to fly over, and it consumed a little bit more fuel. We had computer alarms, but fortunately people helped us solve that problem. So the landings clearly was the most memorable thing for me to remember.
Roger. We got line credits on our screen now.
Why don't we use our recent experience of planning to go to the moon to help other nations do that, so that we can take our resources and have a progressive pathway of long duration human space flights beyond the moon with the ultimate objective of the moon of Mars, Phobos, that incidentally Russia and China are sending a spacecraft there to bring a sample back while we're concentrating on just the moon. But the ultimate objective sometime in the early 2030s with international robotic support to land people on the planet Mars.
Buzz Aldrin, got to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
And do make sure to join us over the next few nights for more coverage of this historic 40th anniversary. We'll visit one astronaut who's channeled his talents in a surprising new direction, and we'll cover the events commemorating the first lunar landing. The sixth time is a charm. That's what they're saying at NASA tonight after the Space Shuttle Endeavour finally got off the ground.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Endeavour, completing Kibo.
The 7 astronauts who endured multiple delays are now on their way to the International Space Station, set to deliver the final piece of Japan's Space Lab. The mission comes almost 40 years to the day after another blast-off captured the world's attention. 4 decades ago, Apollo 11 bounded to the moon and delivered the first men to walk on its surface. On this historic anniversary, Matthew Price looks at where the space program has been and where it's heading next.
Even 40 years on, it is still breathtaking.
2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
3 men strapped inside a small cabin on top of a rocket on a 500,000-mile journey to the moon and back. For 4 days, the world looked up as their fellow human beings slid round the moon. 400,000 people worked on the project, but 2 men got all the glory.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
In essence, this vast undertaking was all about one thing: beating the Soviet Union in the space race, getting to the moon first. 40 years later, a national competition is still incredibly important. The likes of China, Russia and India are all talking about their future lunar missions. And yet some are asking an important question. What is the point in putting man back on the moon? National pride, perhaps. The Chinese and others are keen to plant their flags on the moon, a marker of their growing global power. The US, too, is aiming to go back. By 2020, NASA hopes the new Ares rocket will deliver astronauts to the lunar surface and then beyond.
No technology exists that you can send somebody to Mars and expect to bring them back safely. We're not at that point. So use the moon as kind of a stepping stone to incrementally branch ourselves out into the solar system. That's what this is about.
But the massive government budgets that funded Apollo no longer exist. And this week, the second man on the moon told me that America's new moon project is a waste of time and money.
I fail to see the point why we, the United States, would want to go back and explore where we've been before. Who's going to get to Mars first? While we're doing something at the moon? I fail to see the logic of why we would want to do that.
Still, for now it seems a new moon race is developing. The question is whether getting back there will be anything like as awe-inspiring as the first time around. Matthew Price, BBC News, at the Kennedy Space Center.
Since Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon 40 years ago, only 11 men have followed in these footsteps. One of them was Alan Bean, who in 1969 spent nearly 8 hours on the lunar surface as an astronaut aboard Apollo 12. Since then, he's been trying to recapture the experience through art, and instead of turning to potted plants or landscapes, his brushstrokes have been devoted solely to astronauts. Tomorrow, the largest ever exhibit of his paintings will open at the Air and Space Museum right here in Washington. But recently we traveled to Bean's hometown of Texas, Houston, Texas rather, to get this first-person account from the astronaut turned artist.
I think probably I'm the luckiest guy you've ever met, or any other guy because I lived my whole life just doing things that I thought would be the most fun to do.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running.
I had the greatest job in the world, which was being an astronaut flying in space. And I flew on Apollo 12, walked around on the moon, as we know, in '69, and I spent 59 days in Skylab orbiting the Earth. That was a great adventure and a lot of fun.
Landed right smack in that crater. Do it.
Was giving up a lot to decide to become an artist. About half of the astronauts thought it might be a good idea. The other half thought it was crazy. I had them come up and say, Alan, you've had all this training and education. You're going off to be an artist. Do you think that's a worthy thing to do with what you know? I said, yes, it seems like this would be a good thing in the long run. I'll leave a legacy for the future, and they're not going to miss me at NASA.